I am here this morning with Dan Furr, editor of GT Porsche magazine, and he is in a fantastic studio. I can't wait to show you guys. Hi, Dan.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good. I say I'm broadcasting from my beautiful Bentley this evening, which I'm sure is the most comfortable place to be.
My favourite studio so far.
Well, your company's responsible for helping to keep this thing in the tip-top condition it's in, so perhaps there's something in that.
Fantastic. Okay, Dan, so I mean, a lot of people probably know exactly who you are already. I'm sure they've seen you online and read stuff you've written. Tell us about your history.
Well, I was working as a waitress in a cocktail bar. That much is true. No, I'm the editor of GT Porsche magazine, and your audience might know me as a regular contributor to the excellent Rolls-Royce and Bentley Driver magazine. But in addition to that, I kind of write on and off for sort of, a dozen other titles when time permits. But largely it's the Rolls-Royce, Bentley and the Porsche stuff that I'm responsible for now.
And how has all that changed since we've all been in lockdown?
Quite considerably. I think the biggest impact has been the inability to go out and enjoy test drives, the inability to attend photo shoots. So that poses two problems. Firstly is the content generation. I'm lucky insofar as as far as GT Porsche magazine is concerned, I've forward planned enough content for the however many issues I've got coming over the coming year that I'm able to bring a lot of stuff forward that I'd scheduled to publish much later in the production cycle. Which kind of throws into disarray many of the plans I had for themed issues later down the line. But I guess that's the most problem to have right now. So some of the planned content that we had to go out and shoot during this period has had to be put on the back burner. Who knows when that will be able to put in the mag. And I guess the other big problem has been the fact that with all that extra time, I'm now faced with having to get on with all the projects that I always complain I never have any time for. And now I do. I can't really get out of not getting on with any of them.
I know that you've got quite a few projects yourself, the personal projects, not just the ones you're doing for the magazine. How many cars have you got?
12.
Okay, quick summary.
Yeah, all in various states of disrepair. I suppose the ones that may or may not be of interest to your audience are going to be the Bentley Arnage T, which I'm sitting in now, which is the most recent addition to the fleet. I bought this just between Christmas and New Year, and what with everything that's happened recently, I haven't had a huge amount of time to go out and enjoy the thing, other than tonight, where I can, it's got a nice seat at least.
Good coffee cup holder in there as well.
They're dreadful. There's I can lift up the, here's my conveniently placed can of Coke. But yeah, just elbowing things and so I've got my Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow 2, which is probably the best known of the bunch as far as IntroCar and Rolls-Royce and Bentley Driver magazine is concerned. I've got Porsche 911, 997 Carrera 4S. I've got a Porsche 944 Turbo restoration project. It's kind of up there with the Shadow project, really, as far as scale, or at least how long it's taking. But that was a car that I dragged it out of a hedge where it had been abandoned for about 5 or 6 years, and absolutely everything that could be wrong with this car was wrong with this car, which is what made it so brilliant for the magazine, really, the kind of rags to riches story. But yeah, it's just been such a mammoth undertaking, and so that's ongoing. And then I've got amongst the rest, there's a classic Saab 900 Turbo, and I've got a genuine X-Works British Touring Car Championship Super Touring Vauxhall Cavalier GSI, which is the longest name for a car ever. There are a few other cars in there as well, but they're the everything else is kind of lower down in the queue, really.
And when did you first get the bug for the cars, for the classics?
When I was a kid, really. And I don't know, they weren't really classics then. It was just what everyone drove. But I think it was just the familiarity with cars that that surrounded me as a kid, you know, and you get to, I think it's a familiar story, you know, that you get older, and there comes a point sort of later in life when you're settled in your home life and maybe your career and all the rest of it, and you kind of, you know, I think I'll buy a project and you know, tinker away. And unfortunately, I'm in a very lucky position of having a job that gives me justification to do it as well.
Yeah.
So, and it's lovely as well because I can document the work that is carried out on these cars in print. I've got this kind of, if you like, a deadline to meet constantly for each of the projects, which forces me to go out and do work on them. And also I have a record of all the work, which is great because, for example, the Shadow project or the 944 project, I think having that full document of all the work and all the parts and everything else that's been thrown at the car, particularly with the 944 where it was totally rotten, when you see the finished car, it's going to be so difficult, I think, to imagine to someone that's not familiar with the project how it was to begin with, that it's great to be able to have this this kind of printed record of the evolution of, if you like, from zero to hero, I think.
So, I mean, what's going to happen with those cars at the end of this, you know, project of love? You know, you're
going to say end of my life. It might be the death of me, actually. But,
so valuable. They've got all the magazine content to go with it, as well as your notes, as well as the, you know, there's kind of limitless investment that you're lucky to have with the backing that you've got of your sponsors too. What are you going to do with these cars? You're just going to get to drive them for the rest of your life, or are they going to get auctioned? Any big plans?
No, well, I haven't bought any of them to sell, which is probably going to prove to be my undoing in the long run. So as far as my home life's concerned, I keep adding cars. I'm not very good at getting rid of them, but no, because again, the nature of them being in the magazines, I mean, it's partly because they are, you know, I kind of buy doer-uppers, if you like, and then, you know, just I enjoy the process of doing them up and working on them. I'm quite hands-on, even though a lot of the work, particularly with the 944 and the Shadow, has been carried out by marque specialists. With my other cars, I'm very much hands-on, and I get such a thrill and a kick out of it. I can't. And they're all so different, and there's so much work that needs doing. I, you know, perhaps spread myself a bit too thinly.
It sounds like you don't really know is the answer. They're yours. You're going to keep
them. They're all mine. They're my cars. And
okay, cool. So that kind of leads us on to Pandora. Let's talk about Pandora, because that's how I got to know you. Obviously she's a labor of love. She's a full restoration story that's regularly featured in several magazines now. Tell us, how did that all come about, and where are you with her? A little bit of a summary to date. I know it's been several years, but
yeah. Oh goodness me, yeah. That's
I know.
I think it's been about a month, isn't it? Yeah. I suppose really the origins of the project, if I'm honest, start kind of when I was a kid. Really. I hope your battery's charged.
Plugged in.
You know, I kind of grew up in the 80s. Born in the late 70s, grew up in the 80s, and you know, I grew up in a middle terrace council house on one of the poorer estates of my hometown. And so the kind of cars that I was exposed to when I was a kid were just sort of everyday beaters, really. It's what everyone drove, you know, kind of exotica, if you want to call it that. That sort of passed me by completely. I'm the editor of GT Porsche magazine, but I don't remember the 911 registering on my radar at all when I was a kid. And the kind of cars that my friends and I lusted after were like the Ford Sierra RS Cosworth or the Vauxhall Cavalier GSI 2000. So these were the council estate Ferraris, you know. These were the cars that really kind of turned us on. And that's because they looked pretty much like every other car in the streets that we lived in. I mean, there were, you know, supercars, if you like, of the era that were impossible to ignore through media coverage. So, and because they were sort of technological trailblazers, so we might be, you know, the Ferrari F40, Testarossa, the Porsche 959, for example. Even if you didn't really know your cars, you were aware of these cars. Mm-hmm. But there was another that kind of always stuck out, and it was a Rolls-Royce. And I say a Rolls-Royce because the young me didn't really know what he was looking at, but I knew like that kind of classic front-end profile. I mean, looking back now, I know I was looking at Shadows and Spirits, but it was, you know, the big grille, the quad lights, all the rest of it. And again, this was the era of, you know, the greed is good era, and the you know, the status symbols and all that kind of really vulgar stuff. But it seemed to be that anyone who wanted, in the most vulgar way possible, to show the world that they'd really made it, whether it be a pop star or a TV presenter or, you know, a giant of industry,
Mm-hmm.
always have a profile photo taken with their kind of kneel up on the bumper of their Bentley Turbo R or their Shadow or whatever it happened to be.
It now.
Yeah, so it kind of captured the imagination, really. It's, you know, sort of the loads of money kind of character, all those kind of things, you know. And I remember when, I don't know exactly how I came upon this information as a kid, but I remember discovering at least that this Rolls-Royce thing that I was looking at was worth sort of like 3-4 times the value of my parents' house,
Mm-hmm.
which absolutely blew my mind as a kid. And, you know, and it was very much a kind of, you know, like, this is not a car for you. And it was like putting a red rag in front of a bull, really, you know, sort of, well, why not? No, if you're going to tell me I can't have one of these, then I'm absolutely going to have one of these somehow, you know. And fast forward to, you know, best part of 40 years, and I've got one. However, you know, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that, you know, I went out and bought a brand new Rolls-Royce or anything like that. But as you grow older, you know, your kind of understanding of these things change. And I think I still always held a fondness for that, the Rolls-Royce profile, if you like, the Shadow, the classic boxy profile. And I love kind of big saloon cars, you know, whether it be cars that just have, like the one I'm in now, you know, a sort of a best part of a 3-ton 4-door saloon that has absolutely no right to travel as quick as a lightweight Porsche Boxster. It's absolutely fantastic. Yeah. And so I think as a kind of tongue-in-cheek nod to my younger self, really, it was in about 2014, I think. I started, you know, constantly anyway, which is my undoing, but I'm constantly looking through classic car classifieds and eBay almost as a pastime. It's a very dangerous hobby, really, because you see something that you... Yes, that's it, research. Oh, yeah, I'll coin that one for myself. So I kind of always fancied a Shadow. And really it was sort of around about, I'd say 6 years ago, getting on for 6 years ago anyway, that I thought about buying one. And yeah, and so that was, it kind of, as I say, the seeds were sown when I was a kid, but it was more like as I grew older and had a love of classic cars and cars in general, you know, it wasn't about the status symbol or anything like that, but just about how glorious that the Shadow is. So I did everything that you would probably never recommend to someone buying a Shadow, and bought pretty much the cheapest one, the roughest one, from a transit salesman. I mean, every box ticked in the do not do this when you're buying a Shadow rulebook. I looked at the advert on eBay, and it was kind of like a primer grey looking Shadow. So that's unusual. I haven't seen one of those before. You know, one of the things that really I took to. And then, of course, I got to view the car in the metal, and it was this kind of pale blue. No, this isn't the right car. It just turned out that the guy who'd taken the photos to upload had taken them from his crap smartphone straight, you know, in terrible light, and the car looked a completely different colour. And so that, yeah, from the moment that, not even, well, before I'd even seen the car up close, you know, everything was awry. But yeah, I remember the test drive, which went okay, but you know, there was nothing really worked properly, and you know, the holes in the exhaust made it sound more like a V8 muscle car than this silky smooth crew machine. And when I eventually did the deal, which took about 3 hours, because this transit salesman's, he didn't have a forecourt, it was just this kind of penned off field really in the middle of rural Yorkshire. And so I was trying to do a bank transfer to pay the guy for the car, and I managed to knock him down a fair bit based on the fact that there was all this stuff that didn't work. And but I couldn't even pay him because there was no network coverage whatsoever. So Sharon and I are kind of wandering around this yard with our phones in the air, looking in all different directions in the hope that we can at least get some kind of semblance of, yeah, that, well, there was, yeah, civilization was connected to us in some way or another. But yeah, so I got the car, and yeah, I thought we'll better put some fuel in it. And I was following Sharon, who was ahead in our regular car, and she pulled into the petrol station before me, and she got out of the car, and she could not believe how quiet this Rolls-Royce was. I mean, it was just the smoothest sounding thing. Well, no sound really. It was just so quiet. And I glided into the petrol station and pulled up to the petrol pump, and she's like, I can't believe how quiet it is. It's like, no, literally, because I've been freewheeling for about a third of a mile. because it ran out of petrol, and it was just the sheer weight of the thing, the momentum that had been built up, gave me just enough to pull into the petrol station and grind to a halt next to the fuel pump. So yeah, it was just it's been an adventure every step of the way, really. The thing is, I don't know how the hell it managed to get an MOT, but it was MOT'd, and it still had a fair amount left on it. So I kind of treated the time that I had with the car over that winter, early into, what would that have been, 2015, I think, to really try to determine exactly what needed doing. And the answer was everything. It had been given a fairly rough paint job. I think a previous owner had painted it to sell it, if that makes sense. And so the paint was in a really bad way. But again, that was a huge bargaining point when I actually got to see the car up close. And I wasn't too fussed about that anyway, because as I say, I didn't buy it thinking that I was immediately going to be entering some kind of concours competition. It was bought as a rolling project, a rolling restoration, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just a restoration. There wasn't much rolling going on, because I think it just dumped all its fluids, and the MOT ran out, and there just seemed to be it's just a prohibitively huge number of jobs that needed doing. And I had other jobs on the go at the time as well. So it kind of joined the queue, and it just sort of sat motionless for a bit.
Uh-huh. It was Classics Monthly first did the project, right?
Yeah, well, they contacted me and said that, I mean, a lot of the magazines, the classic car magazines that Kelsey Publishing runs, they've got their own project cars owned by the publisher in some of these magazines. So it might be a Mark III Escort, or in recent times they've had various Jaguars and so on. And yeah, a similar story as with the Rolls-Royce. But I think there was a desire for a Rolls-Royce project, that, and I think you've been in conversation with them at this point, but they didn't have a Rolls-Royce on the fleet. There was no Bentley on the fleet. And I think that was probably just a purchase too far as their coffers were concerned. However, the MD recognised that I had an impotent Silver Shadow 2. And it didn't take long to put 2 and 2 together and come up with the solution, which was to say, well, look, can we give you can we act as the catalyst, really, if you're getting this thing back on the road? And really, it was the push that I needed, because it's just too easy to get distracted with perhaps less challenging tasks when it comes to older cars, especially when you've got so many of them knocking around. And so it was really great, because, as I said earlier, knowing that the car was going to be in a magazine, and Classics Monthly, every 4 weeks, as the name suggests, I know. But it was a tough deadline that I needed to meet, and that the work had to be done. And so I'm really thankful, really, that it did come about, because though we're nowhere near finished on the project, and we are now, however many years on, it was really the starting point, really, for what I'd hoped to do with the car from the point that I bought it. But it's like work gets in the way, life gets in the way, and you kind of end up with a list of need to do's and nice to do's. And unfortunately, the Shadow ended up being on the nice to do's.
Well, personally, what I like about it, and I know that you've received criticism for this, I like the fact that you've taken something where some people would say it wasn't economically viable for you to fix up that car. And that's what I like, is that you've done it anyway. You've been able to, because you've had the help with some of the sponsorship. But had you not had that, it sounds like your intention was to do it anyway, eventually.
Yeah, it absolutely was. I mean, that was really what I was asked by the publisher as well. They said, are you intending to do anything with this guy? I thought, well, yes, I absolutely am. But at the moment, I don't have the time or the space.
Might take me 20 years, but that is my intention.
But it's the same with the other cars, like the 944. I mean, really, it's a 944 turbo, which means that it's worth a considerable amount more in its completed form than a regular 944. But it's the same story. You kind of look at it, and it probably would have been prohibitively expensive, even as a 944 turbo, to take on. And because, I mean, that was so bad. You looked at the car and bits fell off it. And so the Shadow, like Pandora, wasn't anywhere near that bad, but it could have quite easily started to go down that route if had there not been the attention thrown at the car. I think had it been left any longer, put it that way, then there may have been more serious questions. But I think when you do it for the love of it and for the passion of it, and these are sort of passion projects, you're not really thinking about the money.
Yeah.
I mean, you are aware of the fact that you don't want to end up like remortgaging your house for a car that's worth 20p, but at the same time, I'm not saying it's worth 20p before people start emailing offers in, but 40p maybe, but there is that it's kind of, you're not doing it concentrating on the numbers, and yes, you might have argued that, you know, you could go out and buy a perfectly presentable example of the same model for more money and save yourself all the hassle.
Yeah.
But I think firstly that perhaps doesn't recognise the purpose of the project, which isn't necessarily about just being able to waft around in a lovely Rolls-Royce. That's kind of the payoff at the end of it, if you like. But it's the labour of love, the getting involved. And who's to say that you're going to spend lots more on a car and you end up having to do half these jobs anyway? I mean, we're dealing with old cars at the end of the day.
So on that note then, plug for your, I mean, there's obviously IntroCar, we don't need to plug us, but who else has helped you on the Pandora project that we should mention?
Well, I think, chiefly IntroCar, you know, is worth name checking you guys for obvious reasons. You know, the fact that your prestige parts range is so comprehensive and that you are constantly introducing parts. I mean, even just in the length of time that I've been working on this project, you've introduced parts to the catalogue that I've been able to take advantage of that weren't available when I bought the car, you know. And so that kind of constant evolution of your product line has been absolutely invaluable. So thank you to you guys. There has been Cambridge Concours, who took the car early on, and another bargaining point was the interior was in an absolutely terrible state, tears and all. But I, in my mind, imagined that the only solution was a complete retrim. But Simon Walters at Cambridge Concours, who deals with car detailing primarily, assured me that the technology and the products that were available on today's market meant that you could actually, you would never have it looking like new, but if you wanted a sort of worn looking interior, those tears could be made to look like creases very easily using flexible fillers and modern fabric paints and so on. So he took the car and blitzed the interior and you know, did an absolutely astonishing job. I was really amazed at what can be achieved, which again, the work was documented in print as well. And I know he had a number of inquiries from members of the Rolls-Royce Enthusiast Club, who I think he even held a technical seminar off the back of inquiries that he received from people who had terribly worn interiors, but weren't looking to have them retrimmed, but just, you know, brought up to a serviceable state. And so he deserves big thanks, really, because the interior of the car has been a huge one of the kind of stumbling blocks, really, as to getting enjoyment out of the car. Colbrook Specialists, who many will know as being arguably the UK's kind of leading shadow service, maintenance, restoration, modification specialists near Peterborough. Very early on, they got involved with the project, and Colin, the head of the company, kindly took the car in to give me an educated review, is the polite way of putting it, really, of what this car needed beyond what I'd looked at with my untrained eye. And I mean, I asked him to give me an exhaustive list, and boy, was that an exhaustive list.
I remember
really
seeing that in the print version when you got that news.
Yeah, it should have been like a 50-page supplement that came in the magazine, really.
No, I'd love to see that supplement.
I think it's when you hear people say things like, well, it's not the worst I've seen, but it's not far off. You think, oh, is that good? Is that bad? I'm not sure. Really. But those guys, yeah, I've carried out the majority of the spanner work on the car. Yeah, they really, you know, they took the car, and I was constantly feeding them parts from you guys, and they were able to get the car up and running and get everything sorted that needed sorting to get it to its first MOT in years, so that it could actually be on the road and enjoyed. Bilstein are worth a mention, because they put together a suspension kit for me for the car, B6 heavy duty dampers in each corner, because the shocks were on the car. I don't know if they're original to the car. Certainly couldn't find any paperwork to suggest they'd been replaced at any point, the shocks, but yeah, and they've absolutely transformed. I mean, as you can imagine, I mean, you'll know from IntroCar, I mean, I purchased every available rubber bushing or mount for, I mean, the chassis of the car is pretty much, I mean, you look at the car externally and paint wise, it's you know, not great. But look underneath the car, it's like brand new. Yeah? Everything that could be replaced has been replaced, down to, yeah, the calipers, pretty much every chassis component that can be serviced, has been serviced, which is great, because I mean, again, going back to what we said earlier about maybe purchasing a more expensive car, and that may have been more cost effective. First, I mean, again, that works on the assumption that you've got the money in the first place to be able to buy the expensive car. And I think a lot of these projects start with people, myself included, who perhaps buy the one they can afford, which isn't necessarily the best one, and then, you know, as time progresses, save up a bit of money, get a bit of more work done, and so on. Whereas, you know, buying one large sum to begin with is perhaps not feasible. But Colbrook Specialists have been great. KM Exhausts, fantastic. They make exhaust systems for pretty much every post-war Bentley and Rolls-Royce motor car, and using all genuine Bentley hardware, put together a full stainless system for the car. There is only so many repairs with gun gum that you can make until you have to bite the bullet and say, do you know what, it's time. And the system that they fabricated for the car is absolutely fantastic. I know that they supply them as a kind of DIY fit at home kit as well, but you know, I went up to their workshop, which isn't a million miles away from where I live actually, and the guys there, you know, fine-tuned the positioning and the exhaust and got it. Yeah, and that was great as well, because it was the first time that I'd heard how the car was supposed to sound, because the exhaust was in such a bad way. But all this did was, well, not all it did, I shouldn't say, but what this did serve to do was to silence, if you like, the unwanted noise that was coming from the back end, only for me to discover that there was a blown exhaust manifold gasket and cracks all in one, where I think the new downpipes had been fitted to the manifolds. They disturbed previously badly repaired manifolds, and so the cracks had reappeared that were just, I mean, they were kind of all the way around the manifolds. It was, yeah, shocking. But I mean, that was great as well, because I was able to get a set of brand new manifolds from you guys, a kind of fit and forget solution really, to make to this perfectly fabricated brand new stainless steel exhaust system for the car. So that was great as well. Longstone Tyres, you know, they were great, and were able to offer a range of different tyres for the car. So I also have to pay tribute to the work of Dan Moore from Dan Moore & Co, the & Co being his trusty sidekicks, Carl and Caroline. They've carried out a lot of the recent work on the car, primarily involving the resurrection of its fuel system, which had packed up in Dan's workshop, when he very kindly agreed to look over the engine just to make sure all the ignition components I'd fitted were installed correctly, and to check the engine's timing. And it was while the car was in his workshop that the fuel pumps, which were already on their last leg, so it would seem, decided to give up the ghost. So he got rather more than he bargained for when he invited me in for a coffee, cake, and a look over the car. But consequently, he has, with the new fuel pump from Burlen, and overhauling the carburetors, it was a kind of, let's address everything while it's here kind of a job. And between him and with advice from Dean Jaggard, Mark Specialist, who's also a friend of Rolls-Royce and Bentley Driver magazine, they managed to identify the cause of what I initially thought was a misfire, which happened to be the failing fuel pumps at the back were not sending as much fuel forward as they should, but also the fuel weakener system in the car's engine had been stuck to on. So the car was permanently running lean, thankfully not dangerously lean, but lean enough for it to every now and again have this annoying blip, and between them they managed to cure the problem, which is brilliant. So it's now running better than it ever has in my ownership.
It sounds like you've probably got really strong relationships with these guys now. It sounds like you've been for a while.
Well, the thing is, it's the case that I think a lot of people buy into projects like this, because you're not just turning up with like, yeah, a car that just happens to need a bit of work doing. It's such a long-winded process, taking this car that was on its last legs, you know, I know I'm exaggerating in terms of the roles, but certainly a car that is certainly way past its best, and then bringing it back to life in really spectacular fashion in terms of it being in print and the amount of parts and the love being thrown at it. I think it's the same with the 944 project that I keep referencing. These two cars, they really seem to, people really appreciate them, really, just what a cool project they are and how fun it is, you know, to be able to do it all. And for everyone to get involved and benefit from the exposure that the project gets as well.
And do you think you'll ever have her concourse level at the shows?
I don't think so, because if I had it concours, I mean, bodywork is the next major step of the project. That was always the case, to get the mechanical sorted, get the chassis sorted, get the interior sorted, and then worry about the exterior. My rationale for that really is that when you're in the car, you can't see outside, so it's not going to bother. It's not going to impact the driving experience.
Yeah.
And I'm not intending to put the car into any shows for silverware, so it doesn't really matter at the moment how she looks. But bodywork is definitely the next. But I don't think I'm not looking for concours. It will be painted. It will be. But I don't know if it can be concours, because we're already kind of down the OEM plus route, really, where there are, whether it parts on the car that are being replaced with standard-ish specification, but perhaps they're just, maybe polybushes here or a different type of suspension component there. Nothing takes away from the character of the car, but perhaps it's just enhancing elements of the car. So yeah, it's a car that I just want to use and enjoy. And I think the problem sometimes, not every instance is like this, but when it comes to concours, there's a danger that you don't want to use the car because it's too nice, and you get a stone chip, and suddenly in your mind it's like a boulder's just smashed into the front of the vehicle. And I want to use my cars, and the thing is, I have to practice what I preach as well, particularly as editor of GT Porsche magazine. We try to avoid talking about the value of these cars because the focus has to be on getting out there and driving them. And if they were tucked away in garages, no one would ever see them. And so the next generation of owners aren't going to fall in love with these things in the way that we did, because they're not going to be exposed to them. So I think it's my duty to get out there and put many more miles on this car. And she's already done, I think, 148,000 miles or something. So, which Colbrook attribute to how good the mechanicals are, because the car has been lovingly used over its lifetime, as opposed to being sat still and everything seizing up constantly and having to be replaced. So,
on that note, what's your daily driver?
Well, I'm in a lucky position, really, that I kind of hop in and out of different cars, depending on either the mood that I happen to be in or what I kind of need to be doing that day. So I suppose I've got a workhorse, which is a Vauxhall Vectra VXR estate, which is, that's just, it's a cheap and cheerful, powerful, good-looking load lugger, really, which I can just fill the boot with tons of crap and take to the workshop and back again. So that's probably the one that fits in the daily category, really.
Okay. And then I guess the last thing is just to ask you is, like, how's everything going with the distribution of the magazines at the moment?
I think the closure of the high street is obviously going to have a huge impact across the board. GT Porsche magazine is somewhat insulated against that, in that we have such a high number of subscribers. Not every magazine is that lucky, but at the same time, we have such a large overseas reach, particularly in North America. And at the moment, import and distribution into US newsstands is a challenge, to say the least. So publishers are taking sensible measures in order to try and soften the blow that magazines, regardless of how well they may be performing on a title by title basis, but just as a kind of portfolio as a whole, to try and limit the impact of the downturn in sales and in some instances advertising revenue as a consequence of this. Because let's not forget that it's not just a case that companies are perhaps pulling back on advertising because they're worried about their bottom line right now, but those companies might not be in operation at the moment. They might have shut down entirely, so it doesn't really make sense for many of them to advertise. That said, others have kind of embraced the opportunity to get on board with such enhanced reader engagement. New advertisers are coming on board to some of the magazines as well. Rolls-Royce and Bentley Driver, and I think GT Porsche are benefiting from that at the moment, because the kind of cars that we cover are, yes, we've got a lot of cars that are managed and maintained by specialists for owners, but many of these cars are kind of projects that the owners themselves dote on. That's part of the enjoyment of it. And so I think so many people have been out working on these cars during this period of downtime. They need the parts in order to be able to get on with the jobs that they've drawn up to complete. So
a lot of the content you're producing is going to be even more relevant now that people have the time to be spending at home with their projects. So it's kind of,
yes,
the need for the content is very strong. It's just getting that content to people in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, the audience engagement is through the roof at the moment, as you say, whether it be people that are at home with lots of time on their hands and therefore are, like I mentioned earlier, so getting on with the jobs that they often don't have the time to deal with. And so, you know, tinkering with cars is a prime example. And so we've seen not only the audience engagement rise for us as content producers, but the advertisers are benefiting as well, because now people are kind of saying, well, I've got to get on and do the jobs that I've been putting off on the car, so I need to buy the parts in order to do those as well. So I think where there, thankfully, shipping and distribution of parts to the customer network has remained open on the whole, which has been great for everyone involved, really. I don't think it's a stretch to say that readers often buy a magazine and through the course of the on sale cycle will sort of dip in and out until the new issue comes out. Whereas, as far as I can tell at the moment, based on the emails I'm receiving and messages across social media, I mean, the magazines, people are sitting down and reading them cover to cover pretty much in one sitting, and then emailing, say, when's the next one out? Which is brilliant. And in a way is sort of against, I think, predictions, which were that, you know, the magazines were going to be hung out to dry during this period, because, you know, they're luxury items. And but you know, when people are looking to be entertained and looking for things to do, a magazine, you know, I think we'll probably see as well, and there was evidence for this in prior to the coronavirus and the impact that it's having. There was evidence that there was there's currently a rise in sales and audience numbers for print media, but I think this will have really changed that. The spike in subscriptions we're seeing, I certainly think will kind of stand us in good stead moving forward, because there is a kind of people sort of falling in love again with print, I think, that's taking place at the moment, and it was already happening, particularly with a new generation of readers that were joining. Well, they were finding specialist subject matter covered in magazines that previously they hadn't seen before. Readers love continuity. They love coming back to a magazine to follow up on a story, whether it be a series of, maybe it's a road trip series, or maybe a technical series, or maybe there's a series of buying guides, or in the instance of the Shadow Project, it's this ongoing story that the reader feels more involved with the longer we go on with it. And so you've got to reward the reader by trying your very best. Certainly as editors, we have to try our very best to produce a magazine that we'd want to buy. I wouldn't want to spend £5 on the product and get it home and think, what did I buy that for? I won't buy that again. And that's the key to it. You're not going to buy it again. And so that's a reader lost. And really what we want is that reader to come home and say, well, I never want to miss another issue of this. Let me go online and subscribe, or you know, just to come back to us and for us to enjoy the journey together. That's really what we want.
Well, thank you. Who'd have thought that you and I would be having an interview in your car and my living room with our kids doing it?
My car parked in your living room.
Anyway, no, Dan, it's been brilliant talking to you, and thank you.
Thanks for the invite. There's another batch of updates heading your way.
Okay, good. All right, thanks, Dan.
Catch you later.